Start like now.
I'm Bob Darrell, I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Bob.
Welcome back. Now, since there's not everybody's here, I can unleash the secret.
Yes.
I'm such a wise guy. Before we move on to step 8 and 9, which I think are the really big deals in AA, I wanted to comment on the 7-step prayer in the middle of page 76. And it is a reminder when we say to God, I am now willing for you to have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen. We've then completed step 7. I'm not asking him for anything that will serve me. That Alcoholics Anonymous is not a selfish program. It's not a self-help program. It's not a program of self-improvement. It's a program of self-abandonment and service. I'm asking God to take the things away that stand in the way of my usefulness, period, and I don't even get an opinion of what those are. I am advocating along with my will, my judgment and perception and opinion of everything, and now it's in His hands. And I just trust that He will remove the things that stand in the way of me helping His kids. And I think Alcoholics Anonymous is a process by which I am divinely crafted by my sickness and defects to be uniquely and divinely useful to other people that are exactly like me. And that's why in Alcoholics Anonymous it says later on that our real purpose is to fit, and sometimes I think, and refit ourselves to be of maximum service to God and the people about us, because we have a primary, number one purpose in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that is to help other alcoholics, people like us. And in the carrying out of that primary purpose, I get free from the bondage of self. And I get free from me, and God's able to move in my absence and start doing amazing things in my life. Amazing things. No one in Alcoholics Anonymous is rendered white as snow. Not even Bill Wilson. I have a tremendous letter here written to. It was a response written from Bill Wilson to a group in Chicago that really raked Bill over the coals and took his inventory very harshly. And Bill was not perfect, but in his imperfection, he had a degree of humility that is just amazing. And here's his response to being raked over the coals. And listen to what he says to this group in Chicago in 1960. He says that you seem disillusioned with me personally. Maybe a new and painful experience for you, but many members have had that experience with me. Most of their pain has been caused not only by my several shortcomings, but by their own insistence on placing me, a drunk, trying to get along with other folks upon a completely illusionary pedestal, a station which no fallible person could possibly occupy. I'm sure you'll understand that I've never held myself out to anyone as either a saint or a superman. I have repeatedly and truthfully said that AA is full of people who have made more spiritual progress than I ever or can make. That in some areas of living I have made some decided gains, and in others I seem to have stood still, and in others I may have even gone backwards. I am sorry you are disillusioned, but I am happy that even I have found a life here. Bill Wilson, 1960. He never defended himself once. When you're surrendered, you don't have to be defended. That's where the real humility is. Humility is not in perfection. It's in an honest recognition of God's grace in your life and who you are. And what a tremendous thing. And Bill, like anyone who, if you, and I know that there's people in this room that do a lot of service, and if you do a lot of service consistently, somewhere along the line, you realize you've got a target on your back. And that's just the way it is. And people will fire at you, and they'll accuse you of doing it for wrong reasons, and they'll accuse all kinds of stuff. My sponsor is Clancy. I go travel around the world, and I mention his name, and people just will go out of their way to tell me, and they've never met him, but they got all kinds of judgments against him. I said, well, you ever had coffee with him? Well, no, but he's a blah, 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 blah. I said, really, is he? What's your source of information? Oh, I just know. Really? Wow. Psychic members of AA. I worked on the docks in Maine and on lobster boats for a while, and it was years ago when I was drinking. Good job for a drinker. And on all the lobster boats, they have a basket that's about this high and about this big around. And what happens is when we pull the traps, we get crabs get in the traps. And the lobster fishermen don't want the crabs. So they just throw them in this bucket. And it will fill up in a day. It'll have like 150, 200 crabs. And they don't put a lid on it. And they're scrambling to get out. And they're climbing up the sides. And I'm watching it. And these crabs are getting right up to the edge. And I'm telling this guy, they're going to get out. And he says, I said, you need to put a cover on there. I'm telling you, because they're climbing over each other. They're going to get out. He says, nah. I said, look, they're almost out now. I'm telling you. He says, watch. I started watching. Every time a crab would get right to the point where it's just about to get out, the other crabs couldn't stand it, and they'd pull him back down. I think this is one of the biggest crab pots in the world right here. So when it says, are you willing to go to any lengths to serve God and help his kids? Sometimes you have to be like Bill Wilson. You have to get people take shots at you. We never defend ourselves. We just look to the next person we can help. Now I get to talk a little bit about step 8. I think this is the hardest thing we ever do. I mean, objectively, up until this point in the process, there's nothing I've really had to do that puts me at very high risk. I mean, I've had a little bit of risk in the 5th step, but, we check these people out. We're pretty sure. We're not taking our 5th step with a gossip. We've checked it out. We've minimized our exposure here pretty good. But step 8 and 9, man, going out and seeking out all the people I've ripped off, the guys I've dimed out, the people I've really hurt and stolen from. I got situations that were going to put me in prison. And people are talking about me facing all this stuff. And I would hear people talk about amends. I just want to bolt out of AA when I was new. It was just too big. It was too much. I can't. First of all, I'm not going to live long enough to ever make enough money to pay back what I owed. It's more money than I will make in a lifetime. I mean, for God's sakes, if I knew I was going to have to pay this stuff back, I wouldn't have stolen so much. I mean, that's really. And my experience with looking at step 8 and 9 as a newcomer was very similar, I would imagine, to this experience of a kid, say, in the 4th or 5th grade that were to sit down and look at the exams he must pass in order to graduate from high school. A kid in the 4th or 5th grade looking at those exams was going to feel like he might as well just quit school. I'm never going to understand those questions. But a funny thing happens if he shows up every day and does his next assignment and his next homework. By the time he gets to the end of the 12th grade, he has everything in place within him to pass those tests. And Alcoholics Anonymous is a synchronistic place. We talk in AA about the realm of the spirit. In the realm of the spirit, the impossible just takes a little longer. We have a principle called synchronicity that Carl Jung was the first person to ever talk about it. And a synchronistic universe is a universe that is ultimately accommodating. It's a view of a universe that, let's say you're at point A and you need to get to point B and you can't. There's an abyss between A and B that makes it impossible. Throw your hands up. It's hopeless. I can't get there, and yet I need to get there. From the moment of desire, and the word desire comes from two Greek words that have passed into the Old English that means of the Father. From the moment of desire, the universe starts rearranging itself slowly until the impossible becomes possible. You don't have to sit in AA meetings very long to hear synchronistic stories of God's grace, of people that could never, had restraining orders, never see their kids, and now did you see them in the meeting? They had their kids with them. And you hear, that was impossible. We hear stories. We take it for granted, the miracles in AA. How many times we hear people say, you go to coffee with a bunch of people and say, hey, remember Joe, the guy who's living in the bushes behind the AA club? Yeah. Did you know he bought a house? Yeah. What's for dinner? I mean, it's almost blasé after a while. But God's grace works. And Alcoholics Anonymous, that fear that I had of facing the amends, but I had nowhere to go, has been with us ever since the beginning. As a matter of fact, I believe that Alcoholics Anonymous was actually formed on one man's 8th step. In Mother's Day weekend, 1935, a desperate stockbroker who was sober less than 6 months, I think 5 months probably, had just had his whole world fall apart. His one chance to get back on his feet. He had no sponsor, no AA meetings, no nothing. He's in a strange town. He's just about out of money. He has enough for maybe to get drunk if he wanted to, but not even really enough to pay his hotel bill and get back to New York. And he believed something. He believed that maybe if he could find someone to help, he would be okay. And he started calling people, and he found this woman who knew a doctor who really was in bad shape, and he couldn't see that doctor at the moment. He was taking a nap under the dining room table, but he said, tomorrow, come by. I'll get him over here. You come over to the Cyberling Gatehouse where I'm living now, and she was estranged from her husband living in the gatehouse, and I'll have him here. And they came over there and met. He didn't want to go. His son, Smitty Jr., was a really good friend of mine. He'd spent time at my house at a couple of occasions, and I used to love to hear him talk about the stories. He drove the car with his dad in the back seat and his mom sitting up front. His dad didn't want to go. He was guilty. He just drunk up Mother's Day. I mean, he really screwed the pooch on this one. I mean, he was really in a lot of trouble. And Ann was a strong woman, so he don't want to go, but he's going. He's going to go listen to this Yankee talk to him about his drinking. He don't want to go. He said, 15 minutes. Please don't leave me in there more than 15 minutes with that guy talking to me about my drinking. 15 minutes. Yeah. They went into the library, this little tiny room in the Cyberling Gatehouse, and it was almost 4 hours later, I think, that they came out, and Bob came out with his arm around Bill Wilson, and he was lit up. And he said to Ann, and his son was still sitting there, he said, I've never heard anybody talk like this. He said, this guy knows his business. He went in there and never heard anything like it, because Bill Wilson never once talked to Bob about Bob's drinking. Bill Wilson talked to Bob about Bill Wilson's drinking. And for the first time, something miraculous happened. An alcoholic that was all alone and different and unique and hopeless connected with another alcoholic. And it lit him up. And Bill started outlining this newly formed program he was kind of putting together. He's gleaning from some things Silkworth had told him and things he had found in the Oxford group. And he was putting this deal together, and Bob liked it all. He liked the spirit, the prayer meditation. He liked the confession of shortcomings. He liked the help in others, but he refused to do the amends thing. He dug his heels in. He said, I'm a proctologist and doctor in this town. I've just about ruined my reputation. I'm just going to leave that stuff alone. And consequently, Dr. Bob Smith drank again. He went to a convention in Atlantic City. He was so drunk coming back that he was comatose. The conductor didn't want to know what to do with him, so they just laid him on the ground of the platforms. Laid him on the platform of the Akron station. His office manager came down to the rescue again, as she had many times before, and got him eventually back to the house on Ardmore Street, and he was out of it. He came to on what most historians, and some of them don't agree on this date. I know some guys did research and are sure it must be a different date, but the accepted date was he came to early in the morning on June 10th, 1935. Came to like I come to after a long drinking around the clock, shaking, jumping out of your skin kind of deal. Bad shape. He says, "What day is it?" And they say June 10th. And he says, "Oh my God, it can't be June 10th. I have a surgery to perform the morning of June 10th. Dr. Bob was a proctologist. You can use your imagination about what kind of surgery it might have been. And he's like this, and Bill Wilson doesn't know what to do with him. So Bill gets him a couple sedatives, gives him a sedative and a couple bottles of beer, just to, because he could thread a needle in a sewing machine. He was shaking so bad. Can't send a guy like that. Imagine the patient laying there watching your doctor come in like that. So they gave him just enough to calm his nerves down. It was a frightening thing, and sent him into the surgery. And that surgery was over fairly quickly. Nobody knows what happened to the patient. Now, it says somewhere in AA literature he lived. I don't know. I'd like to know. Did he whistle when he walked or what? We don't know. But he came out of that surgery still fairly early in the morning of June 10th, and he disappeared. And he didn't come back all that morning, all that afternoon, all that evening. And it was close to midnight when Dr. Bob Smith came back to the house on Ardmore Street. And his son said he came back and he looked different. Something was different. And everybody had been afraid all day that he went out drinking. Sure, they gave him a couple beers and sent him in. He probably set him off. But he wasn't drinking. He hadn't drank at all. Not a drop. He was out spending the whole day searching out everyone that he owed amends to and walking through the fear and facing them. And consequently, Dr. Bob Smith never took another drink again the rest of his natural life. And in the mere decade and a half that he lived before his death, low estimates is he helped over 5,000 people personally. And then they helped people who helped people who helped people. And I would venture to guess that we are in this room indirectly as a result of one man finally becoming willing to go to any lengths. And when it says in the book on page 76, at the bottom of the second to last paragraph, in italics, it says, "Remember, it was agreed at the beginning we would go to any lengths for victory over alcohol." They're talking about step 8 and 9. Now, treatment centers over the years and well-intentioned people have turned that into being willing to go to any lengths means being willing not to drink and go to meetings. But that's not really what they're talking about. They're talking about really the most difficult part, I think, of this process. Is willing to go out and face people that you don't know if they're going to hit you with a baseball bat. You're going to you're going to have to start paying them money. And I don't know, isn't it? It's a funny dynamic. They don't wait until you're flush to pay people back. You got to pay them back when you're really struggling the most, right? And every alcoholic, everybody wants to say, "Well, maybe one day if I hit the lottery." Well, you probably won't stay sober long enough to do that if you don't start chipping away at this stuff. Most of us sell our integrity a nickel at a dime at a time. We buy it back a nickel and a dime at a time. And it's a struggle in early sobriety. And I think sometimes it's supposed to be. I think this is, in step 8 and 9 is when I really start to exercise my trust muscle with God. It's where I really learn that there's something here that's got my back. When I push myself aside and face people that I'm terrified of facing, and pay money that I'm afraid to pay because I need it. It seems so desperately because I got so much financial insecurity. But those of us that are able to do this, great, great, great things come to pass. Great things. I could tell you a bunch of stories on step. I got to pick one real quick.
We're going to let this bleed over.
Oh, we are? Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind. we were willing to go to any lengths for victory over alcohol. Page 79 is a paragraph that if they were ever to make a sales pamphlet in order to sell people on the idea of making amends, this would be the anti-sales pamphlet for some people. It says, at the top of 79, it says, although these reparations take innumerable forms, there are some general principles we find guiding. Reminding ourselves that we have decided to go to any lengths, there it is again, to find a spiritual experience, we ask that we be given the strength and direction to do the right thing. And here's the part that's a little frightening. No matter what the personal consequences may be.
Does that mean I'm not part of others?
Yeah, that's right. Somebody years ago saw a loophole, and the loophole says, well, aren't I another? Except when to do so would harm them or others, aren't I another? No, other is other than you. Right. We may lose our position or reputation or face jail. But we are willing. We have to be. We must not shrink at anything. Tough step. I think this is really where you find out if your trust in God and your willingness in AA is talk or not. This is really, I know Father Ed Dowling says step 6 separates the men from the boys. I think where the rubber meets the road, it's really step 8.
It's the wheelbarrow step.
This is where you get in the wheelbarrow. This is really where you get in the wheelbarrow. Yeah. Are you willing to act as if you do the right thing, that you're going to be safe and protected, even though your head's exploding on you about how awful it's going to be? And I'll tell you something I've discovered over the years. The more fear that I have to walk through in order to make the amends, the greater reward. And I've seen that consistently in myself and also in the people I've sponsored and other people I know around AA. I don't know why it's like that. There's not a great reward to making amends to people I know are already going to take it well, and it's not a big deal. Where the great things happen is where the ones I'm afraid to face. And then I finally trust God enough to face them. And I get to be wrong. What a miraculous thing. I get to be wrong again. Because my head told me they're going to beat me up. My head told me I'm going to go to prison. My head told me I can't survive these payments. My head has never been right. And I get to be wrong again. And what's the great call? What's the great cry of every alcoholic when faced with these propositions? Well, yeah, that's all fine, but what about me? When's somebody going to make amends to me? When's somebody going to pay me some money? Right? That's self-centered in the extreme. I think that's our default position, is me. And Alcoholics Anonymous is asking me, a self-centered guy, to do something very hard, is to set myself aside. You can serve yourself and get what you always get when you serve yourself. Or you can serve a power and a set of principles and an ethic and a purpose greater than yourself. But if you're an alcoholic of my type, I'm telling you, you're going to serve something. And if you don't serve something greater than yourself, whether it's a set of principles and a purpose and a power, then you're going to serve yourself. But I don't think we have a choice. I think we must serve something. And most of us have served ourselves for most of our lives. And the great question, if you've been doing that, to ask yourself is simply, how's that been working? How's that been working? It's been going real well for you? Happy, joyous, free? Great relationships with people? Life keeps soaring? How's that working for you? And if you're an alcoholic of my type and you have the spiritual malady I got, and you're reaping what you reap, the same thing I reap when I'm running my life on self-will, the answer is, it's not working very well. It's working so good that I was standing on a bridge not too long ago trying to get enough courage to kill myself. That's how well it was working. That's how well it was working. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I was reminded of a great truth in my own case. I heard someone else say one time, when I first got here, what I wanted to do was to work the promises and hope the steps came true. that my history is to find out who I think you want me to be and then go be that. So I hear him reading the 9-step promises, so I'm going to go be the guy that's that way. See, because I don't have any idea what I'm doing. And twice in this chapter, it references this idea of going to any lengths. I've been to a lot of meetings that talk about going to any lengths, and it misses, I think, what's a relatively important piece of that same sentence on page 58. It says, if you've decided you want what we have and are ready to go in to get it, then they tell us what that length is. It says, then you are ready to take certain steps. I wonder what steps they could possibly be referring to. Is there any chance at all that it's these 12? that is the any length that we're talking about. I find 5 prayers in the reading. The text sort of blends steps 8 and 9 together. I find 5 prayers. The first one's on page 76. Immediately before that, it used to be there. Oh, yeah. If we haven't the will to do this, we ask until it comes. That's a prayer. There's another one on page 79 that he just covered. We ask that we be given the strength and direction to do the right thing. There's one at the top of page 80 in the second line. Am I going fast enough? Okay, good. Thank you. Good. If we have obtained permission, consulted with others, ask God to help, and the drastic step is indicated, we must not shrink. This is where somebody else could be involved. There's another one on page 82, about 8 lines down. This one is one of my favorites. What a perspective. Listen to the perspective in this thing. Each might pray about it. They're referencing where somebody's been unfaithful, and now we're trying to come back together. Each might pray about it with this perspective, having the other one's happiness uppermost in mind. What a perspective for prayer. Wow. And then on the facing page, the same distance down, it says, so we clean house of the family, asking each morning in meditation that our Creator show us the way of patience, tolerance, kindliness, and love. So there are 5 prayers that I found. I'm not saying there aren't more. Those are just what I've found so far. This is part of how I work with a new guy on this thing. I remind him, once he's got his 8-step list, and we're going to get down and we're going to go over that list one at a time. I want to know what the harm was you did to this person, because that's what you have to amend, is the harm that you did. A lot of times there are people on this list they didn't hurt. I've had people come up to me and make amends to me because they said I thought I was a jerk in the past. I didn't get much out of that. And so I don't need you to go do that to somebody. What was the harm? And then let's talk about what that amend would look like. What does that look like? And this is red flags. This is me. I think if you take the 4th breath when you're making amends, you've already said too much. Amends is not a lecture course. Do not mess this amend up with an excuse. And if you talk long enough, you're going to give them an excuse, and it's going to take all the power away. I restrict the men I sponsor from using the word sorry. They don't believe you anymore. You wore that out decades before I met you. You will say, I was wrong, or I believe I harmed you, or both of those together is a nice combination. And I say your mother doesn't need to hear your 5th step. I made some mistakes. I believe I've done some damage to you. I'd like to make it right. Would you tell me how? Simple enough. We are not asking you to turn your will and life over to the care of someone who may roundly hate you. That person is not final authority on what this amend is. I, as your sponsor, am final authority on that. If you'd gone to Big Ken Sweeney to make amends to him before he got sober, he would have bashed you for the rest of your life. Right? So we're not asking you to do that. And if he tells you what it needs to be and it makes sense to you, I empower you. Go get it. If not, you say, I'll talk to my sponsor and get back to you. And we'll talk about it. Doesn't happen often, but it does happen. I like to start guys sponsoring when I get them to step 9. That's where I start them sponsoring. If I haven't started them before, and sometimes I do, and I trust the guidance. I believe God blesses sponsorship. And by this time, he's really got a message. He's got some. He can coach somebody into this part that he's done. He's got a message to carry. And there's American philosopher named William Glasser said that the human being has these needs: to give love, to receive love, to do something that matters, and to get some kind of credit for having done something that matters. And I believe sometimes that credit can just come from God when I keep it quiet myself, when I really do anonymity, which is keeping it quiet. So he's ready to give at this point. And he says, well, I don't think I'm ready. I say, good. I hope you don't ever think you're ready. I hope you don't ever think you're ready to sponsor. I hope I don't think I am. I better get God's help on every one of these. This is important stuff. And we're going to go, and I'm not going to have any trouble at all finding a new guy for him. They're not hard. Stand in the door at your home group and shake hands. Ask questions. Oh, you don't have a sponsor? Come let me introduce you to your temporary sponsor. He doesn't know he can say no to that. Come here. I got a friend that's been another guy's temporary sponsor for 22 years. They're both still sober. I don't have any problem with that temporary sponsor thing at all. It doesn't bother me a bit. I think it's a wonderful concept. Yeah, because that guy can't make a commitment. He doesn't need a commitment. He needs a sponsor. Temporary sponsor. Change if you need to. It's not a problem with me. Here's your first assignment. Yeah. Yeah, I'll be your temporary sponsor. I'll be glad to. And I say to him, okay, I mean, the reason I started him sponsoring is one of the problems I have is keeping him moving through step 9. Right? By the time we get to step 9, here we are 6 months into this thing, ballpark. His life has changed, right? He's been promoted at work. He's got money in the bank. He can explain every dent in his car. He knows where they all came from. His key fits in the front door. When he walks in, they don't scatter. He throws the switch. The lights come on. The phone rings. That's a miracle by itself. He answers and says it's him. There's another miracle. He's sleeping in the big bed again. Right? His motivation is gone. I asked Don not too long before he died what changes he'd seen in AA. And he said, when I got here, the focus was on recovery. Today, the focus is on sobriety. The difference is sobriety is simply not drinking today. Recovery is this whole, and it doesn't necessarily contain recovery. Recovery is this whole spiritual thing that we do that always contains sobriety. And that my job as a sponsor is the integrity of the message and to not let this guy settle for relief. I got to get him all the way to recovery. By the time I get him to 9, he's got relief. So how do I keep him moving? I got 2 things that I do. Is one, I get him sponsoring. He sees this rookie catching up with him, and he doesn't want the rookie to get through 9 before he does. I'll tell you that. Yeah. And the other one is I apply the one day at a time concept. This is just what I do, okay? And I say, okay, which one of these amends do you want to make first? And whatever he says suits me, fine. I don't care at all where he starts. Great. Good choice. When can you call him and schedule an appointment? Why can't you call him right now? Good. Schedule it for today or tomorrow. Ring, ring, ring. Tomorrow at 2. Great. Call me at 2:30. 2:30. Yeah, ring, ring. Hey, yeah, how'd it go? Oh, great. He didn't even remember who you were? Yeah, well, that'll probably happen again. So the amendment went okay? Yeah, it did. Well, great. Who's next on the list? Oh, yeah, that's a good choice. When can you call him and make an appointment? Why can't you call him right now? Call me right back. I want to know what it is. I want it within 24 hours. Oh, 2 o'clock tomorrow? Good. I'll be looking for a call at 2:30. It's the one day at a time concept applied to making amends. He looks at his list. He says to himself, I can't make 160 amends. I agree with him. He can't. Make one today. We're only 159 days away from finishing this. It's worked for me. Share a couple things that are a little bit controversial. I would prefer not to be controversial, but I have to lay it out, and this is how it is for me. I walked out of a meeting that I was in one time. I told you earlier that if I say something you disagree with, that I want you to tell me because I may get a chance to learn something. I'm always on a search for that. Constant search. Please, if you disagree, come talk to me. And I walked out of a meeting one time, and a guy that I sponsor, his sponsor, said, I disagree with what you said in the meeting. And what I had said was that my amends to my children would never be complete. And he said, that's not right. He said, let me ask you questions. Did you go to your children and tell them what you thought you had done wrong? Did you ask them what you could do to repair the damage? Did you do it? Did you ask for their forgiveness? Did they give it? And I said, well, yes to all of that. He said, you're trying to be... He said, if you can't come off that cross right now, you can't accept their forgiveness or God's or your own. You have work to do. And that continuing to be the best father you can be is not 9-step work, it's 12th. It's the principles in all your affairs. And he was right about that. I tell you, if your sponsor's got you doing it, I'm in. I don't find living amends in this book. My amends to my children are complete. I'm trying to be the best father I can be to them today. It's not 9-step work. I came down off the cross that day, and I have seen an awful lot of teenage and older children manipulating us into some very sick behaviors under the banner of, you were a lousy parent in the past. And that takes that right out of the equation. I believe this is one of the great truths. Anything that's right for one person involved is also right for everyone that's involved. They may or may not like it, but it is right for them. I quit funding the party for my daughter about 15 years ago. She didn't like it. It was right for both of us. She'll tell you that today. So I'm trying to be the best dad that I can, and that there was a great freedom that came to me with that. And that's why I wanted to share it with you. And I'm gonna get into something else too, and that's I told you the story last night of my white light experience, that my soul hit bottom. I thought about the worst thing I'd ever done. And if you've done this, it's okay with you. It's okay with me. I'm not here to talk about that. What I had done as a young man is I'd paid for an abortion, and that festered my soul. As far as I was concerned, I'd killed one of my own children. And however you are, whether that suits me, I'm not here to talk about that. This is how it is for me. I'm sharing this only in hopes that somebody else who needs to get free will be able to. And I used to drink that away, the what-ifs that come behind that. And I used to drink them away. And I'm laying there in the treatment center, and I can't make it stop. And that's when my soul screamed for forgiveness and got it. And I get to step 8, and I owe amends to an unborn child, and I don't think it can be done. And I have been in the hands of big book people since my early days. Thank God. This is page 83. Some people cannot be seen. We send them an honest letter. And I was with people that knew that. And I was sat down and shown how to write that letter. I have captured it. I have written it down. I've got handouts if you want one. As we discovered earlier today, although there's writing involved in step 4, the writing isn't the significant piece. It's the observations and prayers that are life-changing. In my experience, this letter, whether it's an unborn child, a grandparent, a sibling, anybody that's gone, this letter is not about writing. It is about tears. I got to you unable to cry. And there was a very masculine man in my home group, and he was crying in almost every meeting. He's a drummer, and you'd know the name of the band if I gave it to you. And I went to him one day, and I said, tell me about the tears. And he said, man, somebody says something beautiful in the meeting, and it touches my heart, and I weep, and it feels so good. And I said, man, I can't cry. He said, I will teach you. And he did. And it took me a year to get the first tear out. And now I can just let it run, and I wouldn't take anything for that. Because you see, I'm convinced that my emotions are how my spirit communicates with my mind and my body. And I can't afford to block that channel. Because I've had the experience of the mind and the body running the show. That's how I qualified to sit with you nice people. I need to have the spirit involved. And that's where the emotions are. And he taught me to cry, and I can cry, and I need to. And it's good for me. When I've had a good cry, I feel like my soul's had a warm shower and dried off in the sunlight. It's just I was talking to another guy here, and I don't remember who it was. Just a wonderful thing, how good it is for me. And I typed that up. It's on the same piece of paper. And if you'd like to learn to cry, I can teach you. It works for everybody. I need to warn the guys, however. If you start crying at appropriate times and places, you will attract a lot of very healthy women. Do not call me and complain about this. I told you on the front end. I told you up front, do not call me with that one. And if you're married, don't worry about it. Healthy women are not a threat to a marriage. All right? Ladies, I'd like a simple answer, yes or no. Are you sick of the John Wayne acts that many of the guys are doing? Yes. They see right through it, fellas. Sorry. Okay? And when they see a guy that's in touch with his emotions, it lights them up like pinball machines. I'm going to leave that alone for right now. But I'm going to tell you that's the deal. Because they're into genuine. They really are into genuine. It's amazing. And I was shown how to write that letter. And I wrote it and I got free. I got absolute. Can you see it? Can you see it on me? I can talk about that. And this is not pain you're seeing on me. I'm free. I got absolutely free. Page 124. This painful past may be of infinite value to other families still struggling with their problem. We think each family which has been relieved owes something to those who have not, and when the occasion requires, each member of it should be only too willing to bring former mistakes, no matter how grievous, out of their hiding places. That's what that was about. That's why I did that fourth column in the sexual misconduct inventory for you. I become two things as I do these steps. I become a caddy, and I become an apprentice messenger. I'm an apprentice messenger in step 12 where it says we tried to carry this message. I figure if I was a messenger, I'd be carrying it. It says I'm trying. I'm an apprentice messenger. And I'm a caddy. And I still carry all that poison from my past, but it no longer has stench or weight. And the thing that keeps it light and airy is my willing for God to use it as a tool to help you. That's what happens. And what happened with me in step 5, the first time I told it all, became possible for me to tell it a second time. And when I told it the second time, it became possible for me to tell it the third time. And eventually it got to where I tell it to a few thousand every year. And it just became okay with it. I do not have the power to make a mistake so ugly that God can't turn it into something magnificent. You got somebody that's gone, and don't hear that political thing, please. I'm not into that. I hope you see that. If you got somebody that's gone and you need to get free, I can show you how. It's been my experience that people who write those letters and can't cry get sinus infections and they don't get well. They don't get free. That the tears were the critical piece for me, and I've had the privilege of working with a lot of people. I just did one a couple of days ago. And I watched him cry and really pump that stuff out. And I haven't talked to him since. I'm his grand sponsor. But I bet he's a different man today. You can absolutely get free. Absolutely get free. Don't discount this thing. I serve a powerful God that gave me a powerful program. Don't doubt it. Don't doubt it. One of the difficult ones for guys, and I'm doing this the best I can, and I'll appreciate coaching if somebody has some, is if he has availed himself lightly of some lady's charms, is how do you go back and make amends for that without making her feel cheap? This is the best I can do with it. The first thing is you make sure that you're not going to do any harm on the way in. If she's married, then you find some woman to make the approach kind of thing. And sometimes the best thing you can do is leave it alone. But I believe the thing that I say, what I have said is, I wasn't as good a friend to you as I could have been, and I'm ashamed of that, and I think I've done some damage. I'd like to repair it. Can you tell me how? That's enough. That's enough. This is not a lecture course. This is a gift from Miss Linda. She had been in Al-Anon a number of years. She had completed her 9th step, was sure she had. And she got to 9 again and couldn't get past it and prayed, was given a gift that she calls good amends. And she and I have talked. She's going to tell her story tonight at 7. She asked me to do this piece because I always do it when Bob and I do this. And that is, I think of all the sins of commission, the things I did that hurt people. The thing I miss is the things I should have done that I didn't do. And that is typically to say thank you. She went back and thanked a high school teacher that got her off the back row, got her in school affairs, and probably prevented a teenage suicide. And I went back and thanked my major professor in college, and went back and thanked the guy that taught me to fly that set up my Air Force career. He set it up. I'm a distinguished graduate of Air Force pilot training. That's top 10%. He taught me. He was hard on me and saved me. I went back and thanked him. I thank my mother for being the best mother she could be. I went back and said, thank you. I never told you how important you were to me and how much you mean to me. What a positive influence you were on my life. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I run into previous sponsors. I've had several, and I always thank them when I see them, every time I get the chance. Ms. Linda calls it good amends. Boy, if you haven't tried that, I recommend it highly. I had an experience. There's a guy in my life who was he was a special forces guy. All right? He was on the ground in Laos when the president was swearing we weren't there. And he took the hill tribesmen from crossbows to M16s and led them in combat for 2 years. This guy doesn't know how many times he's killed with his hands. And he was doing some things that I knew about that I shouldn't have known about, but I did. And I was drunk one night and said something about it, and he confronted me, and I lied my way out of it. And then I get sober. And now I got to go make amends to this guy. And he comes to Nashville for a trade show. We're old buddies. And I call him and say, I got to talk to you. He said, come on down. And I can remember standing outside his motel door, knowing that there's a chance I'll be dead in the next 10 minutes. Because if this guy decides to kill me, I can't do anything about it. There's no way in the world I can stop that. And I asked God to go with me on this thing. And I just walked in and told him what had happened. A month later, my wife and I were guests in his home for a week. Don't discount the power of this thing. If you want to strengthen a muscle, what do they tell you to do? Use it. You want to strengthen your faith? Welcome to steps 8 and 9. One of the things we've been asked here, we are not being good guests. And we are the only big book some of these people are going to see. Our failure to show up on time for meals is creating problems for the other retreats. I've been asked to make this announcement. We need to go down there. Our meal is scheduled at 5:30. We need to go there. We don't need to straggle because we're hurting them. And so I think we need to do that. We're not finished with step 9. We're going to get into the heavy stuff after. So we're not finished with it. We got some other things we want to talk about. But in the interest of doing what we've been asked to do, we're going to go ahead and leave. I would ask if can I go do the prayer? Mm-hmm. If y'all would stay seated. We like this whisper of the Lord's Prayer. We hope you do, but if you don't, we're going to do it anyway. Because there are no adults here to stop us. If you would, we'll have a few moments of silence. We'll whisper the Lord's Prayer in a fairly slow cadence. Amen is the last word. We'll have a moment of silence after. Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not to temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory, forever and ever. God bless us all. I'll have those handouts I told you about after supper so we can head on down. Let's go eat. Why don't you go for it right now? Is your mic on?
Test. I'm Bob Darrell. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Bob.
I want to talk about a couple of amends that some of you may identify with. When I first got sober, I had done so much damage with my mother and father that we hadn't talked in quite a while. And they would not take my calls anymore. I know I called from a county jail, and when the operator asked him to take the calls, they hung up. They wouldn't help me anymore. I was not welcome in their house, and it wasn't that my parents didn't love me. I had just broke their heart repeatedly over and over and over and over again. And they were able to physically cut me out of their life, but they could never emotionally cut me out of their heart. So consequently, my mother saw a therapist and took medication, and my father slept 15 hours, 16 hours a day. And I did that to them. And I had really hurt their life. I almost destroyed their marriage. I stole so much before my parents cut me out of their life. I stole so much from my father that he eventually became friends with the guy who owned the pawn shop in our town from buying his own stuff back. And then when he became friends with the guy wouldn't buy nothing from me no more. And I did that to them. And when I get sober, people in AA are telling me that I need to make amends to my parents, and I understand. I'm not dumb. I understand what they're trying to say, but see, they don't understand that it's too late for that. And I am very grateful that the people in Alcoholics Anonymous never gave much credence to my opinion of things, and they just gave me actions to take that I didn't believe in or believed would work. And first action they gave me, they told me to start calling my mother and don't call collect. I remember the first time I called my mom, I called and she answers the phone. I say, "Mom, how you doing?" And she says, "Are you in Pennsylvania?" I said, "No, I'm in Nevada." Well, the operator didn't come on and ask me to pay for the call. I said, "No, Mom, I paid for the call." And her voice shot up an octave. She went, "You paid for the call?" She couldn't believe it. I had always called collect. It was like I had some kind of sick sense of entitlement, right, with my parents. I used them. I had that all that stuff going on, and she did not receive my call well. It was kind of like, "What do you want?" And I was told to start sending my mom and dad cards, call every week, pay for the call. Don't ever miss a anniversary, a birthday, a Mother's Day, a Father's Day, a Christmas. I wasn't making much money. I had a little job making minimum wage, and I would buy cards and I would send them to them. And I did that for a year regularly. And I did it, and they rejected me through the whole year. They didn't warm up to me. And when you think of it objectively, after all I put my parents through, for them to warm up to me easily, there'd be something wrong with their mental health after all I did to them. And when I was about a year sober, they decided to come out to Las Vegas and eyeball me. And they came out to Las Vegas with this attitude, he's probably still a bum trying to con us. But, we've never been to Vegas. It won't be a total loss if we go out there and he's a bum, right? So they came out to Las Vegas with that attitude, really. And I met him at the airport, and I took him out to dinner with my sponsor and his wife, and took him to my home group, and they got to see me with you. And I've never been better. And they couldn't have seen me anywhere better than at my home group. And they got to see me around the old timers who used to pick on us and make fun of us. And then the guys I was trying to help, the newer people, I pick on them because Alcoholics Anonymous works on the first rule of plumbing. Crap runs downhill. And they got to see me with the guys I run around with, and I was taking meetings into a detox in a halfway house, and the guys I run around with to do that. And they saw the laughter, and they saw the emotion and the sincerity and the genuineness of Alcoholics Anonymous. They didn't understand it, but they liked what they saw. And I took them, they went to a meeting with me just about every night, I think, that they were there. And they loved AA. And right before they were to go back to Pennsylvania, I met them in the coffee shop at the Stardust where they were staying. I had my thing all fixed out. I owed my dad a lot of money. I mean, a lot of money. This was years of having fines, and if I don't pay him, I'm going to go to jail, and he'd loan me the money. Years of not having the rent, and if I don't, I'm going to be thrown in the street, so he'd give me enough money. Years of transmissions going out in cars, and I need the car fixed to go to work, and he'd loan me the money, and I never paid him back a dime. And I sat down, I figured it up to the best of my ability, and it was going to take 12 and a half years of payments to make it right. It was a lot of money. And I sat down in the coffee shop with him with my game plan. I was going to start making payments. And he looked at my mom, and then he said to me, they kind of smiled at each other. And my dad said to me, he says, "Look, Rob, we don't want you to pay the money. We are delighted that you're sober. This is the first time in years that we had any hope you're going to be okay. We don't understand this AA thing, but just keep going to it. It's done something good for you. Keep hanging around with those people and just stay sober and forget about the money." Well, I just got out of 12 and a half years of payments. I just hit the recovery lottery. And man, I'm delighted. And I'm leaving there to go over to my sponsor's office to tell him the good news, man, and I'm just excited. I'm thinking about other people I owe money to, how I could convince them to see the light like my parents did. Way over there, and I get to my sponsor's office. I tell him the good news. My dad said I didn't have to pay him, and my sponsor said to me, "It doesn't matter. It's your debt. It's your integrity, it's your debt. You have to make this right. And I thought, what are you talking to my dad? There's no way to do it. There's no way. If I send my father a little check every month, he's probably not going to cash it. He doesn't need the money, really. I didn't know what to do, and my sponsor just said, I believe if you're willing, God will show you a way. And the universe started moving around. And I was working as a cashier in a store, and I got an inspiration one day, and it was just a thought. Sometimes inspiration is really from God is silly little thoughts you don't give much credence to until you start acting on them and you realize they're life-changing. And the little thought was, well, I run this cash register, and this is in the late 70s. Every single day we would get silver coins, wheat pennies, war nickels, silver certificates, gold certificates. There was still a lot of that stuff. Silver $50. A lot of that stuff was still in circulation. And every day some of that would come through those registers. And I thought, my dad has one hobby that it's almost an obsessive hobby. He's really into it. He collects those kind of coins, all that stuff. He'd sit for hours at the kitchen table with that stuff. It was like his deal. And I thought, maybe if I would talk to my boss and maybe I could start buying this stuff and putting it aside, never imagining that I could cure the whole debt. I mean, that would be too much. But maybe I could one day give a bunch, some of it, $1,000 worth of coins and stuff to my dad or something like that, And I talked to my boss and he said, fine. And I started moving along that line. And it's a funny thing when you start moving towards God's will for you, the universe becomes a very accommodating place. And some synchronistic things started happening. One is I started getting raises and bonuses. There was a guy in AA that had a moving business. He used to pay me $100 cash just for a couple hours work moving furniture. And it was amazing, but in about 4 years or so, I saved up at face value the entire debt. In silver coins and gold certificates, silver certificates. There was a couple times $100 bills would come through, the old gold certificates, and I'd have to stick it away, and it might take me almost a month to get the money to actually buy it from my boss's safe. And at 4 years, I took all that stuff, and I was able to give it to my father. He came out to Vegas, and I gave it all to him, and he had a hard time getting it back on the plane, actually. It was bags of stuff, and I think it cost him about $100 probably. I don't know. It cost him a bunch to get it back. And when I gave him that, something changed. Now, I've been communicating with my father and mother by this time weekly or biweekly for several years. There was no doubt in my mind prior to giving my dad that money, there was no doubt in my mind that my dad forgave me, and there was no doubt in my mind my dad loved me. When I gave him that money for the first time in my life, my dad started to respect me. I think I became a man in his eyes. I think prior to that, he loved me, but I was Bob. Bob. Got to make allowances for Bob. Right? I was that guy. I was the guy that, we love Bob, but, he's Bob. And when I gave my dad that money, I think I earned his respect. There's an old saying around AA that you sell out your own integrity and self-respect a nickel and a dime at a time, and you buy it back a nickel and a dime at a time. And amends are not made amends don't work sometimes like 4 shots of tequila. Sometimes you pay and you just chip away at this stuff, and you chip away and you chip away. My dad died that next year, and I was able to fly back to Pennsylvania and be there for my mother and sister. And something started happening that was just crazy. I was the black sheep of the family, and I became the pillar. And my whole family eventually moved to Las Vegas to be around me. Right? Amazing. And I was the outcast. The power of God is strong. And I didn't do any of that. I just did what people in AA told me to do. I'll tell you one more amends, and it was probably one of the most difficult ones I ever had to make. And the reason it was difficult, it was for something I did sober. And, for the stuff you do when you're drinking, there's a little self-exoneration in the fact that, well, I was drunk. I mean, I was messed up. I wasn't sober yet. You kind of get yourself a little bit of relief by hanging it on that hook. But what do you do about the stuff that's kind of slimy that you did as a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous? When I was early in sobriety, I was working, as I said, I was working as a cashier in this store, and I smoked. I had a heavy nicotine addiction. I was better than 3 packs a day. I would light cigarettes off cigarettes. I was that guy. And I went through a lot of cigarettes. And I was struggling, trying to make some amends, and I was struggling, trying to get by just to pay rent. I was not making very much money at the time when I first started doing that. And one Thursday, I ran out of cigarettes in the middle of my shift, and I'm broke until the next day, Friday, when I get my paycheck. And so one of the things we sold in the store was cigarettes. So I thought to myself, that's usually the way I do it. I thought to myself, well, I'll take a pack of cigarettes, and then tomorrow when I get my paycheck, I'll cash it like we usually do at the work there out of the register, and then I'll ring it up. It seemed like a reasonable proposition. Not stealing. I'm just going to borrow this pack of cigarettes. I'll pay for it tomorrow when I get my paycheck. Well, tomorrow came, and I got my paycheck, and I cashed it out of the register, and the thought goes through my mind, you need to ring up those cigarettes. And immediately I thought to myself, I come early, I wait, I stay late. I work harder than anybody else here. I mean, for God's sakes, it's only a pack of cigarettes. Everybody does some of this stuff. It's probably factored into the cost of operation. And I never rang those cigarettes up, and from that moment on, I don't think I bought another pack of cigarettes. And I started stealing all my cigarettes out of there. And then, you know how that is, man. Once you roll down that road and you got that door open, next thing I know, I'm taking a 6-pack of Diet Coke, right? In the realm of the spirit, when you get sick, you don't initially get the connection to your actions and how you're starting to feel and your experience in life. Sometimes in the realm of the spirit, you do something over here and you don't initially get sick over there. Sometimes you get sick over here and then over there, and then eventually it shows up here too. And I started getting real sick, and I don't know what's wrong with me. But I start going to meetings, and it seemed like people were just irritating me in AA. It seemed like everybody was phony. Everybody was just trying to be something they weren't. You know what I mean? Everybody was a liar in AA. Now, I don't understand that I'm projecting sort of this judgment of myself on these people, because I'm the guy that's doing that, really. But I started judging my way right out of Alcoholics Anonymous. I was dating a girl at the time, and I started to pick her apart. I started to get depressed at times. I started to get anxious about stuff. You know, that those nameless fears that you ever wake up with just a feeling of apprehension, and you can't say what you can't really put your finger on what you're afraid of. But I'm afraid a lot. I'm anxious a lot. Free floating anxiety, and I was starting to get some of that again. And then eventually I started picking my boss apart. And the guy I worked for was a good guy. I mean, he never mistreated me. He was really a good man. And I started picking him apart the way we can do. You get that mindset. You could pick apart Mother Teresa with the right alcoholic mindset. And I started doing that to him, and I'm getting sicker and sicker and more into my head, and the emotions are more and more wacky. And one night I get down on my knees to thank God for that day of sobriety, as I've been structured and taught to do. And on my knees in this little apartment, I yelled out something, and I just yelled out, "God, what the hell's going on?" The moment I asked the question, in my pit of my stomach, I knew the answer. I knew what was happening. It was just like that clarity. The reason I'm getting so sick here and I'm on my way to drinking again is because I'm stealing from my boss. I'm a liar, I'm a cheat, and I'm a thief. and I'm trying to pretend and misrepresent myself as some kind of honest member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I've become the guy it talks about in the beginning of the chapter, Into Action, who leads a double life. That I want to have a certain reputation. I want people to think I am, and secretly inside myself, I know what I am. And I'm on my way to drinking again. And it's in all of this, it just became so clear to me, and it scared me. And I started figuring out what it was, how much, and I'd been stealing for a long time by now. And it just overwhelmed me. It was a lot of money. And I don't have the money. And I'm going to have to go to my boss, and I'm going to have to tell him what happened. And he has zero tolerance for employee theft. I mean, and in retail, that's the way it is. He has zero. I'm going to lose my job. He's going to throw me out of the store. I watched him do that. I watched him really get angry at a guy and throw him out. Hope he doesn't prosecute me. I don't have the money to pay him. I'm going to have to try to get another job. Now I get another void on my resume, and I had a bunch of voids that are kind of hard to explain, where I didn't work for long periods of time, and I got another one I can't talk about, or I'm afraid to tell people that he's going to check with him, because they're going to say, don't hire him, he's a thief. And the worst part of all, I think, was the guy that I had to go face had heard me ramble on about my rigorous program of honesty in AA. I couldn't stand myself. And sometimes great things come from a place you get to where you get to that point you can't stand yourself. And I went and talked to him, and I told him what had happened, and he did not take it well. He started yelling at me, and I just stood there and took it because I knew I owed it. I deserved it. And he didn't fire me. Surprised me. He did not fire me. And so I made up my mind. I told him I will pay back every cent of this. And I figured out to the best of my ability the amount. Then I added on another 10%, and then I added on another $50. And the reason I did that is I know how I am. If I'm going to misjudge the amount, it's probably not going to be in his favor. Right? You know, and I was at a point where I wanted to be free of this so desperately, I would chance overpaying it and getting clean in here than to screw around here and might miss it the other way. And I started making payments on this guy, and within no time at all, man, I liked working there again. Within no time at all, I'm doing good. The book says in the 9-step promise, we'll be amazed before we're halfway through. And I started paying this back, and oddly enough, within 30 days of my making the last payment, about 30 days after that, I was not looking for another job. I was very happy there. A guy came to me and offered me a job with an opportunity for management in a related business, and it was considerably more money. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And I put my notice in, and I went to work for this new guy, and I never stole a dime from him, never even took home a ballpoint pen. And I did what Chuck Chamberlain had taught me. I went to work for one reason and one reason only, and that was to help God's kids. I went to work trying to forget about myself and think about the customers and the other employees, to be of service. And in no time at all, I was running that joint. I was getting bonuses. I was making a lot more money, which was helping me facilitate other amends. After a while, I'm at a restaurant, Denny's restaurant one night, and I run into the guy I'd stolen from and paid back, the guy, my old boss, and he's there with his wife. And I started talking to him. I said, yeah, how you doing? He said, well, I'm not doing that. He says, I'm all right, I guess, but I'm kind of a little disappointed. You may have heard I was going to sell my store. I said, yeah, I'd heard something about that. And he said, well, it fell through because of the slot machines and everything. The guy couldn't get past the licensing investigation. And he said, I thought I was going to be able to retire and get free, and I got it back in my lap again. And he said, I guess it's just not in the cards for right now. Maybe I'll find something else will happen. And I had an out-of-body experience. I stood there, and I heard myself say to him, it was embarrassing, I heard myself say to him, oh man, I'd like to buy your store. The minute I heard the words come out of my mouth, I started backpedaling. I was embarrassed. Then I went, oh, I don't know why I said that. I don't have any money. I'm just kidding. And I couldn't believe I said it. And he's asked me some questions, and one of them was, what's your day off? And I told him. He said, meet me here. And I remember walking into the Denny's, and he's sitting in a booth, and he's got these papers laid out on the booth next to him. And I sit down across from him, and he makes me a proposition. He says, if you put your notice in and come back and work for me and run my business, he said, it's not doing very well right now. Or the guy's kind of running into the ground that I thought I was selling it to because he took it over for a while, and he's not doing very well. But if you can get it back to where it's rocking and rolling again, get the numbers up, and it's profitable, out of those profits, you will get 10% of the business every year. At the end of 5 years, he says, I'm out of here. Let the business makes a few payments after that, and we're done. Now, I'm a guy with no education. I'm a guy whose resume includes telemarketing, selling blood, selling drugs, digging ditches and washing dishes and running a cash register. I mean, this is beyond anything I could have imagined. And I said, absolutely. And I started running that joint, and I started doing everything AA told me to do. And when I took that business over, it was doing about $600,000 a year. And I started opening other stores and expanding the business out in other areas. And I think at one point we were doing almost $10 million. And I bought and ended up owning all the real estate that came with the company and the commercial properties. And I sold that company about 5 or 6 years ago, and I was able to retire very well, and with a financial freedom that gave me the ability to do things I've always wanted to do. I'm singing and playing with a blues band, and I'm writing music, and I'm producing TV shows, and I'm doing this for fun. And it may turn out to be very profitable. It may not. It doesn't matter. I'm just doing it because it lights me up, and I like the way I feel when I do it. And I think I stood at a turning point in a cheap little $200 and some a month apartment in Las Vegas, where I could have went right or left. Right, maybe I would have drank, I don't know, but I went left. And I bit the bullet, and I walked through the fear, and I made the amends, and it changed my life. And I didn't expect that. All I wanted to do was I wanted to get this thing off of me. And it was on me, and it was on me bad. And I wanted to get free of it. And sometimes the hardest amends to make are the ones where the fear is the greatest. I have guys come to me a lot who are sober 15, 20 years, 25 years, even longer sometimes, and they're financial disaster areas. And some of them have really good jobs, and the more money they make, the more in debt they become, right? And they just burn their life to the ground financially, and they don't know what's wrong. And they come to me for weird motives because they see the 12-cylinder Mercedes in the house and all that stuff, right? And they think I'm going to teach them some kind of financial trick or something, like some kind of voodoo thing. And to this day, every single case, we always find there's unmade financial amends that keep them stuck. Maybe they're amends where they got away with it because the person wanted to be a nice guy and say, oh, just forget about it. You don't have to pay me, but it never changed the thing in here. Or people they'd hurt and ripped off, and they never knew that they ripped them off. They think they got away with it. The problem is, you know how it is. We never get away with anything because the worst person that could ever know you did it knows you did it, and that's you. That's the problem. That's the worst person that could ever know you did it is you. And you can't escape you. And that's the problem. You can't escape you. And the God within me always knows what I am because he's more of me than I am. And so we start to do this, to clean this stuff up, and I've watched guys' lives just turn right around. I'll turn it back over to Scott. Page 127 is a statement of spiritual cause and effect. It's almost a promise, and I think it has a lot of relevance for those of us who have lived in a lot of financial insecurity and fear and anxiety about material stuff and money. Right dead in the center of the page, it says, although financial recovery is on the way for many of us, we found we could not place money first. We must place spiritual principles first. For us, material well-being always followed spiritual progress. It never preceded it. Now, I know a guy, I know several people actually that have been sober a fair amount of years and have made millions and millions of dollars. And I got to tell you something, they have no material well-being. They're driven, anxious, uptight people about money. And they have more than they'd ever need, and it's never enough, and they can never have enough, and they're most miserable people when it comes to that. They never enjoy one dime of it. I know other guys that make very little bit of money, but they've sacrificed and they've paid back all their debt, and they have an amazing level of material and financial well-being. Because they know that they're free now, and they know that there's nothing inhibiting them from receiving God's grace. There's a promise in the third step, and it says we have a new employer in being all-powerful. Remember, there is one who has all power, and if there's one who has all power, that means you don't got any, because there ain't none left. There's one who has all power. And there's being all-powerful, he will provide what we needed if we can do two things. If I can keep close to him and perform his work well. And keeping close to him means I have to clear away the stuff between me and God. I have to make the amends. I have to jettison the things that the defects and the judgments and the aspects of self that are between me and God. And I have to help his kids. Because if you read this book over and over again, the spirit, the absolute default position in the realm of the spirit is always the same thing. We turn our attention to who we can help. We turn our thoughts to who we can help. I mean, you don't have to read this book and be a rocket scientist before you get from just the repetitiveness of it that's the point, is to help God's kids. So if I can try to stay close to him and turn my consciousness towards him on a regular basis and try to help his kids, I will never, ever, ever need for anything. And God knows more about what I need than I do. I'm telling you. I would never have designed the life I have. I would have shortchanged myself. God knows more about what's good, what's going to light me up and make me good in here than I would ever imagine. Scott?
Thanks, Bob. I love those stories. Isn't that fabulous stuff? Man. Two things I want to remind you again. We're going to start at 8:30 in the morning. The schedule says 9. And the second one is the meditation workshop following what Bob and I are going to do tomorrow morning. My wife and I are going to split that. As those of you who are here today know, she has a tremendous gift for guided imagery. She's going to talk a lot about meditation. She's going to read some Al-Anon literature. I'm going to read from the 12 and 12. And we're going to do another guided imagery, and it's one that the only way I know how to tell you is it showed up at our first men's retreat. It's not like we wrote it, but it appeared, and it's one of the most spectacular things that ever happened to me, and I use it daily now. So anyway, a little plug for that. I go back to talking about step 9 for a minute on this letter thing. My experience has been that it's about crying. When you're making amends to somebody that's dead, if you can't cry, you probably won't get free. And if you write and cry, you compress the process and you don't get it done. Those of you who picked up these handouts, know what, if you've read them, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, if you want one, you're sure welcome to it. Maybe come up and get them after this session. But it can take more than one letter, and that information's down there. My email address is at the end of it. I'm more than happy to talk to you. This is a gift from my home group. We say you take your problems to your sponsor and you bring your solutions to your meeting. That has really improved the quality of the meetings in my home group. Is I've been on the one. Anybody get a problem? The newest newcomer dumps his bucket. The next 8 newcomers tell him how to fix his life. I don't want to listen to that anymore. And so that's why we evolved into what we did. In 9th step, it says a new freedom. A new freedom. The old freedom was, Bob talks about 4 shots of tequila, was a false thing. And the new freedom, and I heard him do this either the last time we did this or the time before, and you didn't do it this time. The new freedom is a freedom from the only thing I've ever need to be free from, and that's the bondage of self. And when I actually do this 9th step thing, that's what happens. And it says we will suddenly realize that God's doing for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. It doesn't say God will suddenly begin to do for us. He will have been doing for me for a long time. My realization will be sudden. I've had a couple of people approach me with a question. It's been the same question, so I want to talk about it for a minute. I sincerely believe that the numbers in front of the steps are important. and that it's important to take them in order. I think it's important to have a sponsor involved in amends. I tried to make amends before I got a sponsor when I was new, and I devastated some people. That is a horrendous mistake. They're in order for a reason. The forgiveness process in step 4 is necessary before I go to make amends to people I have harmed if I currently hate them. If I still hate them and go to make amends to them, it can really be a mess. It can really be a mess. So I think it's so critically important to get through that forgiveness process that we talked about in step 4 before I get to step 9. And then at step 9 that I be doing it under the tutelage of a sponsor who has already done this himself. On page 84, I'll move on and talk a little bit about step 10. And it's not that we don't have a lot more we could talk about the other steps. This is just, we're going to catch what we can. It says this thought that brings us to step 10, page 84, which suggests we continue. Bill tried hard not to use the same word over and over again. He uses the word continue 4 times in this paragraph. We continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. For me, that differentiates step 10 from what I call the evening portion of step 11. Step 10 is about me being present in my own life moment by moment. If I wait until 11 o'clock at night to take inventory to notice that I screwed up at 7:15 in the morning, it takes promptly right out of it. So to me, step 10 is about being present in my own life and being present all the time. And for me, there's a slogan that applies to that, and it's easy does it. When I run Mach 2 with my hair on fire, I don't even know when I mess up. So I need to put the two hardest assignments I've ever gotten are one day at a time, and easy does it. To back it all the way down to that. I got a friend that says he spends too much time in his head trying to clear away the wreckage of his future. That hit. Yeah. So the short form of step 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, probably admitted it. No, I'm sorry. Wait, promptly admitted it. So I have to be present in my own life. So for me, step 10 is about being here with you as I go along. And it says we vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past. We've entered the world of the Spirit. Want to know where you enter the world of the Spirit? You completed step 9. Our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. I don't think, not be wrong, I'd love to be corrected on this. I don't think that they've asked me to understand a thing up until now. It hasn't been about understanding because I had to take out the trash first. I had to dig the poison out of my soul first. And I'd like to thank the lady. I don't know where she is. Somebody came and disagreed with something I'd said, and I've learned something. And it wasn't actually a disagreement, but a suggestion. And I appreciate that very much. I'm looking for people that disagree. I learned. Now it's time for me to begin to understand and to become effective. I can't do either of those until I get the poison dug out of my soul and find out who I really am. This is not an overnight battle. It should continue for a lifetime. Continue, it says, to watch for. Here's that list again. Selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. We talked about what those are, all the functions of self. If these crop up, no, when. This is not an if question. This is a when question. When these crop up, what do? Ask God to remove them. Discuss them with someone immediately. That would be spiritual advisor, sponsor, somebody who's walked the path. Make amends quickly if we've harmed anyone, and then sit down and beat myself up because I'm not perfect. Oh, wait, excuse me. That's not what that says. I can't find permission to beat myself up. And I think beating me up is never the next right thing because it blocks my learning process. Making mistakes doesn't do a thing for me. Realizing I've made a mistake always brings energy to me. And I used to use it beating me. I mean, really get angry with me and thrash around and kick things and all that. And what that does, it blocks my learning process. Because I should use that energy to get focused on where did this mistake come from? What underlies it? What can I learn here? How can I be a better guy? Far, far better way to use that. And then it says we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. There it is again. Same old prescription. Love and tolerance of others is our code. I want to tell a story. When I was sober about a year and a half, my home group started to form. And if there was one non-smoking meeting in the city of Nashville in 1985, I don't know where it was. Smoking was so prevalent in the fellowship that in my home group, when you got a year, they gave you a Zippo lighter with your sobriety date on it instead of a 1-year chip. I've still got mine. A guy that I sponsor who has never smoked has still got his. But it was just highly unusual. So we started a non-smoking meeting in the back room of a clubhouse. And we would open with the everybody else. They said, anybody who wants to have a non-smoking meeting, go in the back. And however many, 4, 5, 6, or 8 of us would go back there. And this one guy's name was Edward. And Edward would say, I'll chair. I thought, I'm going to strangle him. I just know the world will be a better place when Edward is gone. There's just not any question about it. And this guy he just frazzled me all the time. And I kept hearing people say, if you spot it, you got it. And so one time I heard that. You know what a revelation is? A revelation is when I figure out for myself something you've been trying to tell me for 6 months or longer. That's a revelation. You write that down if you want to. And I realized that. And so I thought, okay, the next time Edward does something that bends me up, I'm going to search myself for it. Holy mackerel, I found it. And so the next time he did something that made me mad, I looked and I found it again. And I started following Edward around like a puppy. And I don't know if I was bending him up, but he was twisting me. And every time he did something that made me mad, I searched and found it. I don't know how much I learned from him, but it was a lot. I miss him because I learned so much. He had all my character defects. He had them much worse than I did.
That's not what he said.
Love and tolerance of others is our code. I tell you, sometimes if I have to tolerate somebody, maybe I better be. Somebody told me if everybody you meet stinks, you might want to shake your mustache. You know, it just might be on me. Yeah, okay. And we've ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol. The concept is so important, they tell us the same thing again at the bottom of page 103. No, 113? 103. In italics, after all, our problems were of our own making. There's the good news again. Bottles were only a symbol. Besides, we have stopped fighting anybody or anything we have to. All right, just quit fighting them. That's part of the deal. It takes two to fight. Back on the bottom of 84. We've ceased fighting anything and anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. Where you get sanity? Do the first 9 steps. Do the first 9 steps. We promise you sanity. And for me, there are 2 kinds of sanity. There's sanity of action, which is the important one. And then there's sanity of mind, which I have most of the time. My sponsor told me that in the history of this planet, no human has ever been put in an insane asylum for being insane. It has never happened. They put us in there for acting insane. And nobody's ever been let out for being sane. They let us out for acting sane. Right. So on those days when we developed this vital, again, necessary to life, vital 6th sense, I hope I can always have new ears. I hope I can always hear the new people. I had 10 years when this guy had 6 months. And he and I were talking about this, and I was bringing him through the work one time. And he said this vital 6th sense, he said, I guess if I'm still using my other 5 senses to try to have my own will, I won't develop this vital 6th sense. Yeah. Wow. One of the most powerful, I wonder sometimes, am I still on the path? I've had several of those big spiritual experiences. I just told you about one of them. I've had a couple of 3. I guess I've had 3. I think the thing that tells me most that I'm on the path isn't those. It's the fact that I find things about me that need work, not things that are wrong with me. Discovering something else about me that needs work never feels good. Identifying the problem, though, is the first step toward fixing it. And the reason that this is evidence to me that I'm on the path is the day before I got to recovery, there was nothing wrong with me, thank you very much. And if you guppies would just shape up, this place would be just fine. And the fact that I'm finding things about me now that need work is not a cause for me to be sad or unhappy with myself. It is the clearest of all indications that I'm on the path. That was an important lesson for me. My sponsor said prayer is not an opportunity to change God's mind. It's not a sales presentation. This is a chance for God to change your mind. I think he was right about that. I want to tell a story. I have permission. I sponsor a young man we call Hippie James. Hippie James he's a hippie that got born 3 generations too late. And today is his 24th birthday, and he's 6 or 7 years sober. I'd have to look. Yeah. and he's in college. He's having a long, not terribly distinguished, but a long college career, and just a character of the first order. I guarantee you, when Hippie James starts talking, my home group freezes, because he is really carrying a message. And he told this story. He claims that there's an outfit that makes music, and their name is Fish, but they spell it funny. I'm 65 years old. I'm willing to take his word for it. I don't really need to know. And they were going to have their last concerts, what he said. I told him it was their last concert, because I've been watching these music guys for a long time. And it was going to be up this way somewhere, Vermont, New Hampshire. Did I get that right? New Hampshire? Was it Vermont? Okay. And so he's going to go. Nobody would go with him. So in Nashville, Tennessee, Hippie James gets into the Hippie Mobile, and he drives 32 hours nonstop to wherever this place is in Vermont, to discover that the car line to get into the campground is another 10 hours. Yeah. And he's a whooped pup. And he's going to sleep behind the wheel, which is not a serious problem in a parked car. The problem is that people are passing him, and this 10 hours of stretching. So he gets out of the Hippie Mobile, he pops the trunk, he pulls out the Coleman stove, he sets it up on the trunk of the Hippie Mobile. If you saw the Hippie Mobile, you wouldn't think much of that either. He fires it up, and he's making coffee, and he's making soup. And he's eating it, drinking the coffee, and he's sharing it with the people in the vehicles around him and talking to him. He said, because what I realized was that if I were going to stay physically awake, I was going to have to stay physically active. And then he said, if I'm going to remain spiritually awake, I'm going to have to remain spiritually active. Powerful. Page 156. Phenomenal amount of information in this one paragraph. Could go in many of the steps. I'm going to stick it in here. Paragraph in the middle of page 156. This is Bill and Bob, and they're only two sober. But life was not easy for the two friends. Plenty of difficulties presented themselves. Both saw that they must keep spiritually active. That's what Hippie James said. One day they called up a head nurse of a hospital. They explained their need. Did you hear that? Their need was to go and try to give this away. They had a need to go and do that. I think it's a powerful, powerful piece of information. For those who are hiding behind the fact that the steps are only suggested, we have good news and bad news. The good news is you're right, they're only suggested. The bad news, they're the only suggestions we got. Yeah, I'm going to get controversial again. We're committing murder with the phrase. The phrase is don't drink and go to meetings. You'll die from that. That'll kill you. My sponsor asked it this way. He said if sitting around with a bunch of other alcoholics talking about our problems is going to get people sober, wouldn't the boys under the Woodland Street Bridge in Nashville, Tennessee be sober tonight? Because that's who they are and that's what they're doing, and it doesn't work for them, and it doesn't work for us. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. That's where it happens. I think the meetings are terribly important. My sponsor says, quite sincerely, he believes the program works better for people who do not drink between meetings. I think it's a very good point. I think the not drinking part's important too. But the fact is that what I need is this spiritual awakening. And the way I get that is by actually doing these steps. Not learning them or believing them or interpreting, but actually doing them. That's the piece that changed my life. And that's what we're here to talk about. We'll go on with 10?
Yep. Thanks, Scott. I'm Bob, still an alcoholic. This line has always struck me in the beginning of step 10 where it says, we have entered the world of the Spirit. So somewhere in the first 9 steps, something has happened to us. I noticed something all my life, and it used to aggravate me, and I never understood it, but there were guys and gals that I was in school with, that I later worked on jobs with, that I was involved in different areas with, that for some reason these people, everything they touched turned to gold. Their relationships were wonderful. Everybody loved them. If they entered into any kind of art thing, it just took off. If they entered into business, they did very well. It's like they had the magic touch, and their lives were very, very successful and rich and full and happy. And I'm miserable, and I'm dying here, and I've lost everything, and I'm smarter than all those guys. And it seemed really unfair to me. It was almost as if they had something, like maybe the day that they told everybody the secret. I was sick that day at school, or something. But they had something I didn't have. And what I think they had, and I've observed this in people since I've been sober that aren't in AA, is that they were in the realm of the Spirit. I employed a lot of employees, and I had certain employees that weren't in a 12-step program. They weren't even involved in church, but yet they intuitively knew how to go with the flow and stay in the flow of life and to take care of people and love people, and that was just natural to them. They never considered putting themselves first, and their life worked, and it worked really, really well. My daughter, I think, is intuitively like that. I don't know what. She just amazes me. There was a famous basketball game where Michael Jordan, at the very end of the game, it was tied, and he made a half-court shot. Right in, swish. The crowd went wild, and he's running. There's a famous shot of him running down the court, and everybody's on their feet screaming and yelling and cheering. He just won the game at the last second, and he just goes. And he was interviewed later, and they said, "How did you do that? Under all that pressure, at the last moment, you made a half-court shot. That's impossible. How did you do that?" And he said, sometimes you get in the zone, and when you're in the zone, you can't miss. I think that's the realm of the Spirit. I think also there was a time when alcohol got me in there. There was a time, and some of you remember this, if you're a salesman, there was a time when alcohol made you the best. Really, and this is not an illusion, you were really the best salesman there was. There was a time, if you're a musician, that you played better than you ever played when you had just enough alcohol. It freed your spirit, and you could go with a flow where everything just clicked. And then, like a boomerang, it turned on us. Bill Wilson was really into boomerangs. If you ever go up to Stepping Stones, he has them all over the place, hanging in there. He loved the concept of something that could take the flight and then come back and turn on you. Right? And he used to compare it to alcohol. And he uses the analogy, it was like a boomerang that came back and turned on you. And when it turns on us, we lose that magic. And Alcoholics Anonymous is restoring it. It is putting us into the realm of the Spirit where everything, if we can stay out of the way and let the power flow through us, everything just clicks. Just clicks. It works. This line in the middle of page 85. One point before we go into this. Why do we have to continue to do this? Is it because God's not going to love us if we don't continue to clean house? Never. There's nothing I can do that would make God not love me. God never, ever, I don't know where this idea came into Christianity that's insane, that God punishes us for our sins. We're not punished for our sins, we're punished by them. We are never punished for them. And we all know that. We all know what we've always reaped what we sowed. We always reaped what we sowed. You can't escape that truth. I had a long list of people I hurt in my 8-step list. And I tell you something, I never got away with anything. Every time I hurt somebody, whether conscious or unconscious, or even most of the time I didn't even know I was hurting you, I always paid a price for it in here. And I paid a price in my life. And if you would have seen my life at the end in the accumulation of all the people I've hurt, you would have seen a guy who was punished by his sins. Severely. Severely. How bad does it have to be to stand on a bridge and sobbing, trying to get up enough courage to kill yourself? On page 85, Scott touched on this a little bit, but I want to take a minute and talk about it. I think it's very important. We lose a lot of people here, and when it says it's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action and rest on our laurels, they're not kidding. It's easy. The problem with recovery from alcoholism through the 12 steps is it has within it good news and bad news. The good news is that over time, with the practice of this way of life, you become very comfortable and very happy and very successful to whatever level is right for you as a result of that. The bad news is you start to become comfortable and happy and successful. And when the monkey, it's like there's that old saying goes around AA, the monkey may be off your back, but the circus is still in town. It's never changed. But it's so easy it's so easy to make that incremental change of consciousness. When you're brand new and you don't know if you have a place to live, you don't know if the people you care about are going to talk to you anymore, you don't even know if you've got a job, you're so full of remorse and fear and depression and hopelessness, man, you feel like you got a bad case of alcoholism. How bad of a case of alcoholism do you feel like you got when you're 5 years sober and you got some money in your bank and all the amends are made and everything's going very well? Now you got pretty much everything you ever wanted. It's easy to let up on the spiritual program of action. It's so easy to get to a point where you feel like I know intellectually, there's a problem. I got alcoholism. Yeah, sure, I got alcoholism. But I don't feel like I have alcoholism anymore. And then what happens is often as we start to gradually, slowly, incrementally compromise a little action here, a little action there. Now I'm not going to 8 meetings a week anymore. I'm going to 3. Now I'm not calling my sponsor unless I get through something and just tell him what I did in case he ever needs that information. I don't really have time for service and 12-step work. Let the newer people do that. Me and God are good. I don't have to. We're fine. I'm not a seeker anymore because I think I've arrived. I never tell myself that consciously, but if you watch the feet, and you want to know how you're doing, don't judge it by what you think or what you feel. Watch your feet. How do you act? Do I act like someone who is as committed to my recovery today as I was when I was new? I hope if you were to come to Las Vegas and follow me around for a week, you would come away with that. If for nothing else, you would come away with a sense that, boy, that Bob's got a bad case of alcoholism. You see all the crap he's got to do every week? I hope I look like somebody who's just as serious about this program as I was 29 and a half years ago. Dr. Silkworth wrote an article on relapse that's stellar. If you ever get a chance to read it, it was in one of the first grapevines. And he compared relapse from alcoholism to different other diseases. And the one I liked the most, he compared it to heart disease. Certain types of heart disease are chronic, exactly like alcoholism. And one of these guys he'll have a heart attack. And all of a sudden, if he lives, they'll put him in the cardiac care unit and they'll stabilize him. And before they release him to go back home, they give him a program of action. And the program of action might be no salt, no fried foods, cut down on your meat, your dairy products, exercise, maybe take some medication if it's appropriate. And what happens is he gets out of the hospital and he starts following this because he's scared because he almost died. And what happens in no time at all because of the exercise and the diet, he starts feeling better than he's ever felt before in his whole life. And maybe a year and a half down the road, now maybe he's running 5 miles. He's out bowling one night with a bunch of guys that are younger to him, and he's looking at these guys, and he's out bowling them, and he's thinking, I'm in better shape than these guys are. And this place is noted for their cheeseburgers, and he's watching them eat those he loves cheeseburgers. He's watching them eat those cheeseburgers, and they're juicy, and they look really good, and he's thinking, I'm in better shape than all these guys. How come I can't have a cheeseburger? How come I need to go to so many meetings? How come I need a sponsor? How come I need to help others? And all of a sudden he says, give me a cheeseburger. And he eats a cheeseburger, and the worst thing that could ever happen happens. Nothing. And a little key turns in his head. Right? A little key turns in his head. When they say alcoholism, cunning, baffling, powerful, it's also patient. And then all of a sudden, gradually, he starts compromising his actions. And then one day, out of nowhere, a 1,000-pound weight slams him in the chest. If he's lucky enough to survive it, he ends up in a cardiac care unit. They're showing him Father Martin movies and stuff, and they're all that crazy stuff. Man. And they give him another program of recovery, and he's back to square one. We lose a lot of people like this. It's tied into a delusion that it talks about in chapter 3 that is why we lose people that are sober 10, 15, 20 years. It says the delusion that we are like other people. And the chapter is called more about alcoholism, so that must mean people don't have alcoholism. The delusion that we are like other people, or presently maybe like, after 10 years, has to be smashed. Alcoholism is not something you can ever get over. If you have this chronic, permanent disease of alcoholism, you will always live in the shadow of it. You can live a tremendous life, provided you keep in fit spiritual condition and you do certain things every day. Just like the diabetic can live a great life, watches his blood sugar, his diet, exercise, medication, does everything he's supposed to do. There's in the next paragraph, there's something that's I find interesting. It says, Scott touched on this a little bit. We have begun to sense the flow of His Spirit into us. To some extent, we've become God conscious. After I came to believe in God, I've been God unconscious. I think most of my relationship with God has been theoretical. It's like when you're driving in your car, you have an unconscious sense, and you have faith that there are cops out there. There's cops out there. When you got one in your rear view mirror with his lights on, you have a conscious contact with. This is no longer theoretical. It's a conscious contact. And a lot of my relationship with God is like, I know He's there, but it's not a conscious contact. And then every once in a while, I get moments. And when the moments come, they're not usually through prayer and meditation. They're usually when I'm helping another drunk. Bill in his story says something. He says, if the alcoholic fails to enlarge his spiritual life through two things, and it's not prayer and meditation, it's self-sacrifice and constant work with others. If the alcoholic fails to enlarge his spiritual life through those two things, it says he'll never survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. We are doing all of this, I believe, so we can serve our primary purpose and stop serving ourselves. I think that's the point. The problem with... I tell you one quick little story and I'll shut up. I had this friend who ran a casino in Vegas. I sponsored him for a while. And he told me about all the employees they caught stealing from him. And he said something, and this helped me in my business a little bit. He said, you'd be surprised. The most honest, other-centered, caring, principled people in the world will steal from you if they can tell themselves it's not for them. It's for my kids. It's for my wife. It's for my family. And they will justify it. They wouldn't steal if it was just for them. But they'll do it to justify. The problem with my wife, my kids, my friends, my family is the word my. It's the word my. It's just an extension of self. That's why in Alcoholics Anonymous, we're so big on helping strangers. Every once in a while, you probably run into guys that say, well, can't I just do 12-step work in my house? The problem is it's your family. It's self-serving. The magic only happens when I am giving of myself unconditionally, and there's no chance of profit, motive, or self-grandizement. There's no self-promotion here. There's nothing I can get out of it. I'm really doing, as Chuck Chamberlain said, for fun and for free. Period. Alcoholics Anonymous is at its best when it's lived for fun and for free. I'm not an advocate of profiting from AA. I know people that do it. I don't know how they survive it. I don't think you can take where you're supposed to give. I must always be in a giver's position in Alcoholics Anonymous. I try to keep all the aspects of self out of it. It's a if you got the ego that I got, that's a full-time job because it's just clamors to me all the time. If you've ever seen the movie Two Towers, the second Lord of the Rings, there's a scene in there where King Theoden is sitting on his throne and there's this character called Wormtongue, and Wormtongue sits right next to him and just clamors in his ear. Clamors, just say, well, sire, don't listen to them. They just clamors. And my ego's like that. It never goes away. It clamors to me all the time. And it's always about me. It's always about me. My stuff.
A couple of things we call it a ball game. Okay. Gift from my sponsor. Don't let the things that AA brings you take you away from AA. That's a pearl right there. Don't let the things that AA brings to you take you away from AA. Someone asked Miss Linda one time what she thought about all the time I spend doing meetings in jails. I'm rather involved in that. She said, I love it because I love who he is when he comes out of there. And the ones where they work the most, the ones that I get the most out of are the ones where I don't want to go. My team is playing on TV tonight, and I got the jail commitment. And I don't want to go. I walk around the house telling her I don't want to go. She never even responds because she knows I'm going. Because that's the night that I come out of there a foot off the ground with tears running down my face. Because I know that I've been a tool in the Master's hand in somebody's life. And I share an experience that I had a number of years ago. I've had it more than once, but this is the first one. I'm sitting in a little restaurant in Nashville having lunch, minding my own business. And this guy walks up to my table and he says, you don't remember me, do you? And I said, Mister, I apologize if I should. I don't know you. He says, you came into a prison I was in a few years ago, and you spoke, and I heard you, and I believed you. And I'm doing what you said, and I'm never going to be incarcerated again in my whole life. And I would like to thank you for my freedom. And I'm overpaid for the rest of my life. I'm overpaid for the rest of my life. I thought for the longest time that I owed this tremendous debt of gratitude to the men that carried this message to me, my sponsors and some other people. Page 124 says that's not right. This is powerful, powerful stuff. This painful past may be of infinite value to other families still struggling with their problem. We think each family which has been relieved owes something to those who have not. I don't owe it to them. I got here with dead eyes. Did you ever meet a newcomer with dead eyes? And you start working with them and you get them into this thing, and all of a sudden one day the lights are on. Right? I didn't turn them on, but I was involved, and I knew I was a tool in God's hand. And there's nothing that touches that. And those guys that carried this message to me, they got to see the light come on in my eyes. They're overpaid. They were a tool in God's hand, and they know it. And they're overpaid. I owe them nothing. The reason this debt can't be repaid is I owe it to the next newcomer that shows up to my home group. That's where the debt's owed. I owe it to the guys that are in prisons and jails in my city. That's where I owe the debt. And that's why it can never be repaid. Anything else?
No.
If y'all don't mind remain seated, we're going to have a few moments of silence. And we're going to whisper the Lord's Prayer.
Don't miss tomorrow morning.
Kind of gently. Yeah, the sessions that I enjoy the most of what Bob and I do are the next two.
Yeah.
We save the best stuff for last. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
We'll have a few moments of silence. We'll whisper the Lord's Prayer. We'll have a few moments of silence after that. Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. God bless us all. We'll see you in the morning.